In 1966, Marcello Gandini gave the world the Miura. It was a masterpiece of grace, widely called the most beautiful object to ever touch asphalt. But the architect grew restless with beauty. He pivoted toward the stars, penning the Countach, an alien visitor that made every other car look like a relic of the past. It's between the beauty of the Miura and the shock of the Countach. There was a darker chapter. Most monuments are born in boardrooms. This one was born in a heist. In 1970, Gandini took his obsession with the wedge to its most violent conclusion. He drove a copper-colored blade directly under the gates of Turin. Bypassing the guards and the status quo, the Stratos had arrived, and the era of curves was officially over. Every monument begins with an act of defiance. In 1970, Nuccio Bertone and Marcello Gandini didn't wait for an invitation to Via San Paolo. They knew the doors of Lancia were traditionally locked to anyone without a Pininfarina badge, so they brought a knife to a gunfight. They arrived in a copper-colored silver of glass and geometry called the Stratos Zero. As they approached the Lancia headquarters, the security guards didn't even reach for the gate lever. They didn't have to. The car was an impossible anomaly, sitting just 84 centimeters off the dirt. While the guards stood frozen in the Turin sun, Bertone simply pressed the throttle. The Zero, carrying the salvaged heart of a crushed Fulvia V4, slipped beneath the waist-high barrier like a ghost passing through a wall. It was a heist of the imagination. By the time Bertone parked in the center of the courtyard, the era of the sensible car was dead. He didn't just show the directors a prototype. He showed them a future they weren't yet brave enough to inhabit. In that one silent slide under a security gate, the wedge was driven forever into the heart of Lancia. The Stratos was the first of its kind, a machine born not for the road, but for the dirt. Look at the glass. It wraps around the cockpit in a perfect crescent. This wasn't for aesthetics. It was a tactical necessity. In the mountains, the Stratos lived sideways. The curved windshield allowed the pilot to see through the side window, to look at the exit of a corner before they had even entered it. It was a geometry designed for a world that was perpetually out of alignment. A weapon, however, is useless without a spark. The chassis was a masterpiece, but for months it sat in the corner of the workshop as a hollow shell, a body without a soul. Cesare Fiorio knew there was only one engine in Italy that could match the violence of Gandini's design, the Dino V6 from Maranello. But Enzo Ferrari was a man of cold pride. To Enzo, his engines were sacred. He refused to let his masterpiece be soiled. by the mud and gravel of a rally stage. He viewed the Stratos as a scavenger. For a long year, the project withered. The engine war wasn't fought with steel, but with silence and rejection. It was only when the production lines for the Dino 246 began to slow, leaving a surplus of iron and aluminium, that El Commendator finally relented. It wasn't a gesture of friendship. It was a cold commercial release of 500 engines, like a reluctant gift from a rival party. The hat was finally installed. But the Stratos never forgot its initial rejection. When you hear a Stratos today, it doesn't just rev, it screams with the bitterness of a machine that had to fight just to exist. Inside, the poetry ends and the struggle begins. This is not a cockpit. It is a geometric claustrophobia. Because of the massive front wheel arches, the drivers were forced to sit angled toward the center, their legs towed in like a soldier in a foxhole. There was no room for comfort, only for the calculation. This was the stratospheric paradox, a cabin that looked like a Euclidean nightmare, but smelled of raw fuel and sweat. It was a machine that defied the physics of the human form, demanding you surrender your posture to its purpose. You didn't sit in a Stratos, you were wedged into the center of a mechanical storm, forced to become the literal axis upon which the car rotated. If Gandini gave the Stratos its skin, Cesare Fiorio gave it its teeth. As the team manager, Fiorio was the general of a mechanical insurgency. He didn't care about comfort, and he certainly didn't care about the fairness of the sport. He was a pragmatist who turned Lancia into a paramilitary operation. Fiorio once remarked that the Stratos was the first car ever designed specifically for the rally. He understood that to win with a machine this radical, the support had to be just as aggressive. He would have his mechanics rip the car open on the side of a mountain, swapping entire gearboxes in a matter of minutes, while the competition watched in disbelief. Under his command, the Stratos didn't just win, it humiliated the status quo. From the snow of Monte Carlo to the red dust of the safari, it colonized every terrain it touched. It was 300 horsepower of pure, unadulterated intent. To drive the Stratos was to manage a permanent crisis. Its wheelbase was so short, it didn't just turn, it tried to rotate on its own axis, like a spinning top. It was twitchy, malicious. It required a pilot who could dance on the edge of a knife while the world blurred into a smear of mud and speed. In the archive, we see the faces of the survivors, and none felt the burden like Bjorn Valdegård. The Viking was a man of immense physical strength, and he needed every bit of it to wrestle the Stratos. While others feared the car's nervous energy, Valdegord used his sheer will to pin the rear end down. He treated the Stratos like a wild animal that needed to be broken. In the heat of Africa, he pushed the machine until the metal groaned, proving that while the Stratos wasn't a partner, it could be conquered by those brave enough to match its violence. He was the one who proved that if you didn't fight the Stratos, it would surely consume you. But if Valdegord conquered the car through strength, Sandro Munari found a way to speak its language. At the 1974 Sanremo, the world met El Drago, the dragon. On those tight, dizzying Italian mountain passes, the struggle finally stopped. Munari didn't fight the Cockpit of Crisis, he inhabited it. While the competition was physically exhausted by the Stratos' layout, Munari entered a state of shared instinct. At Sanremo, as the fog rolled off the Mediterranean and the asphalt turned to ice, the dragon didn't just drive. He breathed through the machine. The mechanics would rip the car open, swapping gearboxes in the time it took for a heartbeat to settle, and Munari would climb back into that Cockpit of Crisis as if it were a throne. He was the only one who didn't try to tame the twitchy energy. Instead, he embraced it, using the car's instability to rotate through corners with a supernatural fluidity. In Sanremo, they didn't just win a rally, they validated the heist. Munari proved that the Stratos wasn't a mistake of geometry, it was a masterpiece that had simply been waiting for its master. The Stratos remains a geometric scar on the history of the automobile, a heist that succeeded beyond its wildest dreams. It is no longer a car, it is a permanent disturbance in the air, a jagged piece of the future that landed in 1970 and refused to leave. We don't drive the Stratos to go forward. We drive it to remember what it felt like when machines were still dangerous. It is the Euclidean shard, the red dust, and the scream of a V6 that never learned how to whisper. It doesn't belong to the road. It belongs to the edge.